Committee will come to order. Thank you. We appreciate the time as we had to take to do voting, and there will be voting later on as well. So I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. The OIG, Inspector General, has issued a report. Do Ms. Thorson, Mr. Jarvis, Chief Chambers, do any of you take issue with any of the findings in that report?
I'll start. We appreciate the IG's report, and we take all 10 recommendations that are spot on, and we're taking every one of them seriously.
But are any of the findings, do you take any issue with any of the findings? I appreciate your implementation of the recommendations. We're going to talk about that. But any of their findings, would you take issue with any of those?
Well, their findings indicated a snapshot, essentially a photograph of the conditions of inventory of weapons at the Park Police facilities at that moment. I consider them accurate, but they do not indicate the real behind the scenes. They backed out and said, go do an inventory, and that's what we're doing now.
They took a snapshot in 2008. They took one in 2009. We had similar problems and challenges. Were those accurate back then?
I am not that familiar with those reports because I was not in this role at that time.
And I guess that's one of the concerns, is that when the Inspector General offers recommendations, they take snapshots. We worry that some report gets put on some shelf. I think that's in part why we're here today, is the repetitive nature of these challenges. Chief Chambers, according to the National Park Service Handbook 44, an inventory is supposed to be taken twice a year. Does that happen?
Yes, sir, it does.
Did you sign this memo of August 31st saying, quote, I certify that all weapons inventories for which I am responsible have been completed and all weapons records have been reconciled?
I did, sir.
What did you base that on?
A number of conversations with folks in the chain of command, including the firearms custodian himself.
So merely conversations? Did you ever review any of the records? Did you ever look at any of the physical materials?
I reviewed the records, but I did not physically touch all of the weapons that are in the inventory. But I did ask probing questions. I asked how it compared to the previous inventory to ensure that there were no anomalies. And I asked if everything could be accounted for. Even
who did you have that conversation with?
With whom, sir? Deputy Chief Chapman, Sergeant Dave Whitehorn, and perhaps the captain in training at that time.
So why the discrepancy on what Mr. Knox is able to find versus what you found?
So during the period of time he came in, we were actually between two effective computer systems. One had been shut down. The other was not back up and running. And so we were left to use Excel spreadsheets, which frankly were better than nothing, but not able to quickly ascertain where items were or get a quick count on how many of anything there was. That's all changed since then. But in that snapshot of time, we were limited in our capability to be able to quickly review.
Ms. Thorson, why was this the case? Why the discrepancy between the two? You have an OIG report. You have somebody saying they certify and sign this. They're obviously not reconciled. So I gave you an opportunity to say, were there any issues with the findings of the Inspector General? You didn't say a word. So,
Chairman, I have no issues. The Department have no issues with the findings in the IG report. I think the 10 recommendations are.
But they're in dispute. Somebody's wrong. You have Chief Chambers saying that the weapons inventories for which I am responsible have been completed, and all weapons records have been reconciled. And the Inspector General is saying, no, that's not the case. I'm trying to figure out from the three of you, why is that? How does the Chief of the Park Police say they're reconciled? The Inspector General says, no, they're not even close. I give each of the three of you an opportunity to explain, to question or dispute any of the claims or findings from the Inspector General. You didn't say anything, so put yourself in my shoes. What's the right answer here?
Well, I'm not particularly familiar with the memos and what the Chief did. She's
Why not?
testifying about that.
What's your relationship with the Chief? Like what responsibility or oversight or?
The Office of Law Enforcement Security, which reports to me, has responsibility at the department level to develop policy, departmental level policy, coordinate with the bureaus, and provide oversight.
So do you feel a responsibility for what happens or doesn't happen in the Park Police?
The accountability and the responsibility for, in this instance, firearms, rests at many levels. Starts with the officer, supervisors, the chief, the director of the Park Service, whom she reports to directly. And then my office has a responsibility periodically to go in and ensure that actually all of the law enforcement programs in the department follow departmental policy. So that is our role.
Mr. Jarvis, we have a dispute here. Explain to me how we can have two totally different conclusions. Who messed up here? Is it Chief Chambers? Is it the Inspector General?
The way I see it, Mr. Chairman, is that we have an inventory management issue, and that is exactly what the IG found. They came in, they could not reconcile the weapons that they saw in the U.S. Park Police possession against what should be a computerized database. There was no reconciliation, and so they backed out.
Chief, were you or were you not able to reconcile the weapons inventory?
At the time that the IG was there, we were not in a position to say with certainty, but we can say now that it has been reconciled.
When were you there? When were you doing this, Inspector?
Mr. Chairman,
microphone, please. You can just turn on the microphone. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we conducted our inspection from February 11th to February 13th and continued.
Of which year?
Of 2013.
And you're saying that they were reconciled on August 31st, 2012, and that within 6 months it was in a disarray. Is that what you're saying?
Sir, I'm saying we couldn't prove or disprove, excuse me, my allergies are acting up. We couldn't prove or disprove whether the records were accurate because at that moment in time, we had Excel spreadsheets, several of them, to try to bring this compilation. The weapons were there, but there was no way to reconcile. We can do so now.
I have more questions about this, as do other members. I'm way over time. Now I recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, for 5 minutes, plus another minute or two if he so chooses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with a kind of a basic question. Given the report and the recommendations, has the Park Police accounted for all these weapons? Ms. Thorson, do you believe that all the weapons have been accounted for? That same question for Mr. Director Jarvis and for the Chief and for Mr. Knox, if you wouldn't mind starting, Ms. Thorson, do you believe all the weapons have been accounted for?
At this point in time, our office, in conjunction with the Park Service, have conducted a physical inventory of the Park Police weapons. And at this point in time, 98% of them we have accounted for. There are 3, as mentioned by the Director, that we have not put our eyes on. Okay, so that is not complete, but so there's 3 outstanding at this point in time. So other than that, yes.
I would agree with that. We are not satisfied until we put our physical hands on every weapon that is in the inventory, and we are still missing 3 that are assigned to individual officers who are not on duty at the moment, but will be very soon.
Chief?
And likewise, sir, it's just those final 3 that we know we have to touch. And then just as a safeguard, we've got another step to do. We're going to go back and look at acquisition and property records to make certain that things that we've purchased or acquired over the last 5 to 10 years are actually in that new computerized database. I'm confident that they are, but I want that additional assurance.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Knox?
Congressman, the IG takes no position as to whether they have full accountability of all the weapons possessed by the U.S. Park Police or not.
Okay, Mr. Knox, just let me follow up just a second. So when the inspection was going on, there was a spot analysis that you talk about in your report. So there was no follow-up investigation as in part of your office to go deeper into that issue?
No, sir. As we began our assessment, we realized that the condition of accountability was in disarray.
Okay.
There were not good, clear records of what weapons should be available, what records should be on their accountable records. And so we took a position of looking at the weapons that were physically present in the locations we visited. And the reason for me saying we don't take a position on the accountability today is that although we're confident the National Park Service is doing all they can to inventory the weapons that are currently present within the control of the U.S. Park Police, there's still another step, as the Chief points out, to take, which is to go back in time and identify the weapons that had been acquired either through transfer or purchase or other means, and ensure that all of those weapons are accounted for as well.
Yeah, let me go to another question having to do with the mission of the Park Police to provide quality law enforcement, to safeguard lives, to protect our national treasures and symbols of democracy, and preserve natural and cultural resources entrusted to the American people and to the Park Service and the Park Police. Let me begin with you again, Ms. Thorson. Do you believe that the mission of the park has been compromised as a result of the report and as a result of the issues described in the report?
No, I don't, sir.
If you don't mind, Director Jarvis, I'd just like to get this.
No, sir. I do not believe there's been any compromise to our responsibilities.
Chief, if you don't mind.
Our mission has not been compromised, sir.
And I go back to you, Mr. Knox. Do you feel that that essential mission, as a consequence of your recommendations and snapshot view, has been compromised?
Sir, the OIG assessment related to the accountability of weapons alone, and we did not look at the impact that had on the operational mission of the U.S. Park Police.
That's a neutral position.
It is a neutral position as to the operations as you described them. We feel that the accountability of weapons is a part of their duty and operations, and that those were severely lacking.
In the limited time, if I may, Mr. Knox, your report uses words like inaction, indifferent, nonfeasance, lackadaisical attitude to describe the way the senior management at the Parks Police handled this weapons accountability. Can you elaborate on why those strong words are justified in the report? And then, Chief Chambers, do you believe that that the Inspector General was justified in saying that Park Police senior management has a lackadaisical attitude toward weapons management and accountability? I asked that question because, going back to the question I just asked, it's about the integrity of that function, the police function, and the confidence that the public has in it. That's why these questions are important. So those words are pretty strong words, and your justification for using them is my question.
Congressman, we looked at numerous factors when we came to deliberately choose those words. I would begin with the series of incidents where the chief of the U.S. Park Police had been advised of the serious conditions regarding weapons accountability at the U.S. Park Police. There was a memo authored by the Force Firearms Custodian to the Chief of Police in 2011 that actually demonstrated a inventory variance of 120 weapons that was brought to her attention. Again in that year, the Audits and Evaluations Unit, part of the Office of Professional Responsibility for the U.S. Park Police, issued a memorandum based on their weapons accountability assessment, and they indicated a critical failure in the weapons accountability posture of the U.S. Park Police. And later a meeting regarding the Force Firearms Custodian memo was held, where discussions about the content of that memo occurred. Later, a subsequent meeting with Deputy Chief Chapman was held in 2012 as a follow-up to those discussions. And then I would point out that even as we concluded our field work on February 13th of 2013, I personally briefed the Chief of Police for the U.S. Park Police on February 15th of this year, advising her of our findings and urging her to take immediate steps to begin an inventory and get a handle on what the actual weapons count for the U.S. Park Police weapons inventory was. And we found no meaningful efforts taken until after the publishing of our report.
Mr. Chairman, could, in the overage and the time, could the Chief respond? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. While I would certainly have chosen different words and not characterized it with words that maybe so emotionally driven. I do appreciate the feedback nonetheless. Only because Mr. Knox mentioned several memos, I will touch on them. At each step along the way, extreme action was taken. Dialogue, trips to the field offices by our force firearms custodian. But I must put on the record that the audits memo that talked about the critical failure was a new memo to me. I had never heard of it, and the only record that the Inspector General's office could produce was one that was still in draft mode. It still had the track changes. It wasn't signed on letterhead. It had no recommendations. That memo never made it to my office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the extra time.
Mr. Knox, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to that.
I can't say for sure whether the Chief of Police received the memo from the Force Firearms Custodian, but I would point out the multiple events that occurred between 2011 and 2013.
Okay, let's see.
And it's the position of the Office of Inspector General that at least some of those should have alerted the senior leadership, including the Chief of Police, of the serious conditions of loss of weapons accountability at the U.S. Park Police.
Thank you.
Some action.
Thank you. Now I would recognize Chairman Rob Bishop from Utah for 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity of being part of this hearing. In some respects, I feel like I'm dealing with Syria policy. I don't really know who the good guys are out there. In fact, I think there's failure on every level that has gone through here. So I appreciate it. I appreciate questions Mr. Grijalva asked, and Ms. Chambers, I'm going to follow up on that in a minute. But I want to go to Mr. Jarvis first. The IG report focuses exclusively on failures within the Park Police, for which you have ultimate jurisdiction. Is there something about the relationship or the autonomy of the Park Police that allows them to fall outside of Department policies on firearms?
No, Mr. Chairman. I believe that all of our departmental and National Park Service policies apply directly to the U.S. Park Police.
So the rest of the Park Service, you also have armed law enforcement in the rest of the nation outside of these 3 cities?
Yes, sir.
So how do you compare the accountability in place for those weapons opposed to what we found here in the Park Police?
Well, with all of our managers who have line responsibilities for controlled property such as weapons, we have a policy of inventory. I have a policy of trust but verify, which means I expect them to do their audits and report deliberately on their inventory as well as any missing weapons. And
so I appreciate the concept of the verify. That's extremely important. But have you investigated? What have you done to investigate the concept of park-wide, firearms Park Service-wide, not just with the Park Police?
Well, we have periodic audits where we do send in our agents to do spot audits on the weapons inventory. When I was a superintendent, we would have independent audits done specifically, and I can remember one specific case where we did find a missing weapon that was not recorded, and I removed that employee's law enforcement commission immediately and permanently. So we do have that kind of oversight and auditing going on throughout the service.
So you're confident that this problem only exists within the Park Service, Park Police? It's not system-wide?
It is not system-wide.
Can I ask you why you weren't on top of what was happening then in the Park Police?
I was only made aware of this when I was briefed by the IG. That's the first time, and that was in June of this year. That's the first time I was made aware.
We'll get more into that in detail. I have one other issue with you, though. 2010, the Park Service sent guidance to the field that the Springfield Armory historic site would no longer accept firearms for destruction. So I'm assuming that these historic arms are just sitting somewhere under your jurisdiction. Do you have any responsibility to bear for these unused weapons piling up over with the Park Service, please?
It took us 3 years to get a new contract for weapons disposal. So the Springfield Armory shut down on their weapons disposal responsibilities. It took us 3 years to get a new contract. So there are approximately 500 weapons in the inventory at the U.S. Park Police that are due for disposal and destruction.
Ms. Chambers, is that an accurate number?
Yes, sir, it is.
And are any of these of historic value?
I don't know, sir. I could find out for you.
Really? Do you have any policy for allowing historically valuable weapons to be saved, something other than being destroyed, Mr. Jarvis?
Absolutely. At Springfield Armory specifically, which is the storage repository for historic weapons.
Wait, you mean they're taking them now?
I don't know the answer to that question, but let me just say that before we do complete destruction on the weapons that have been accumulated, we will see if there are any historic weapons that are valuable for display or museum storage.
Do we know how many are?
I do not know that.
Do you know, Ms. Chambers, how many are?
I do not, sir. I know of a few.
Shouldn't you?
Totally. I have that information at my disposal, but not here today, sir.
Look, I'm over by 40 seconds here. I'm not as long-winded as Raul or Jason, but I definitely have second-round questions for some of the rest of you.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from Washington, D.C., Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say I have some questions about the report, but I do want to take this opportunity to thank the Park Police. The Park Police are the only, we have, as the saying goes, 50-11 police forces in the District of Columbia. Every little agency has a police force. This is the only citywide, indeed it is a region-wide police force, and it is often underappreciated. I remember after 9/11, the Capitol Police were quickly reinforced with new police, and it took some time to get around to the Capitol Police, which has much larger territory throughout the District of Columbia and the entire region. So I've watched the Capitol Police very closely. They have jurisdiction, for example, except for the Metropolitan Police Department. They are the only police department that can go anywhere. Most of the police, unless they have signed memoranda of understanding pursuant to a bill I got passed about a decade ago, can't even leave the premises. So when we're talking about after Boston, we're talking about all the parades and the people who can go and really protect people in this town. We're talking about, when it comes to Federal police, only the Park Police. I want to thank the Park Police for what looks to be a quick capture of the person who may have been, is alleged to have been defacing monuments. I want to ask you, I also want to thank you for somehow finding a way to make sure that the Park Police were not on furloughs. That seemed to me to be particularly absurd. When we've had furloughs in the Federal government, we've always exempted law enforcement officers, and we were putting the entire city at risk with all of the officials and all of the ceremonies, and you found the funds. Are you able to fill vacancies in the Park Police, Chief Chambers?
We're not currently hiring, ma'am.
So if someone were to leave that because of the sequester or the cuts, those positions could not be filled?
At this moment, we do not have a class scheduled. We'll be looking closely at the FY14 budget as we get closer to that.
Well, I'll be interested to know whether you are able to keep a force in place during this time. If I could ask Mr. Knox, apparently, and believe me, because I represent the District of Columbia, I was pleased that apparently no weapons were stolen. Weapons were not found to be taken home for personal use. No weapons were ever seized in a crime. Could this have happened without some kind of monitoring? This just happened by chance? Those would have been the worst, it seems to me, of the results. And yet, none of that occurred. Why not?
Well, Congresswoman, we didn't examine our assessment of weapons accountability at the Park Police did not find instances of weapons being stolen. We found instances of weapons not being accounted for properly, either in that we found weapons on hand which were not indicated on the property records, or we found property records for weapons which were not physically present.
So are you assured that weapons that all the weapons are accounted for? Are there recommendations of the IG for how to do this without taking a lot of time and effort, especially now, and personnel, especially now when that personnel, of course, would not be available? Are there examples from either Federal police or other police of ways to do this that you could recommend to the Park Police, so this would not become a paperwork exercise, but would be geared to just the kinds of things you've not found yet: stolen weapons, people taking weapons home when they shouldn't be, or ending up in a crime. So does somebody have a streamlined way to do this that you could recommend to the Park Police?
Well, Congresswoman, we made 10 recommendations in this assessment, which we feel, if complied with, will enhance their weapons accountability posture a great deal. Our expectation would be that they can account for all their weapons, and that would be typical behavior in most police agencies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to allow Mr. Sutherland of Florida, who is on the Natural Resources Committee, to also join us in this hearing. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bentivolio, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on the IG report, the lack of accountability here is very disturbing. I think about how the government holds civilians accountable for the firearms they own as private citizens through registration and licensing procedures. But here, we have a government firearms paid for by taxpayers left in your care with a total lack of accountability. The IG discovered hundreds of handguns, rifles, and shotguns not listed on official Park Police inventory records. Where's the failure here? That periodic and accurate inventory records were not maintained. Is there any legitimate excuse for this lack of accountability? Should there be more frequent audits and inventories? Chief Chambers, in the Army, we are required to hold periodic weapons inventories. Each soldier was held accountable for the weapons they were assigned. And like most all instances in the military, the most senior person is responsible to ensure that his subordinates do what they're supposed to do. Ms. Chambers, as the Chief of the Park Police, who is ultimately responsible for the firearms inventory at the Park Police?
It is me, sir.
The IG report indicated that a board of survey should be conducted whenever an item is lost or stolen. I imagine that in the case of firearms, which are sensitive government property, like in the military. And this is even more important. The IG report also stated that when asked about a board of survey, you were not aware of what a board of survey was and whether it was required to be conducted for missing weapons. Can you explain why this was not clear to you?
Yes, sir. I had never personally heard the term. That did not mean that my team did not. In fact, we've reissued the memo identifying the members of various boards of survey. It had been an ongoing practice. It's just coming from municipal government, it was a term that was foreign to me.
Mr. Knox, are you aware of any disciplinary actions at the Park Police taken as a result of the IG findings?
No, sir, I'm not.
Mr. Jarvis, nice to see you again. Who should be held accountable for these shortcomings? What type of disciplinary actions will be taken?
We are still in the investigative phase on this. The first step was Recommendation 3, which is a full physical inventory. As I indicated in my earlier testimony, we're almost done with that. We still have 3 officers that we want to put our hands on those weapons and look at their serial numbers. Then there is a forensic sort of analysis of the previous procurements. So when were those guns brought into the U.S. Park Police? When were they purchased? When were they transferred from other agencies? We want to compare that to the inventory, and then we will see whether or not there are any weapons truly missing or stolen. And then and only then would we take a disciplinary action if we found that there was true mismanagement. At this point, we have a inventory management issue, not a mismanagement issue. And we've got to get that completed over the next probably 60 days or so to get that second part of that sort of forensics done on the procurement, and then we will understand whether or not this is just a fact that we did not have them in the inventory and could not account for them in the computer system, rather than there are actually missing weapons.
Well, if you can't account for them, it sounds to me like it's mismanagement or something else. But I understand, according to testimony earlier, this has been ongoing for the past 5 to 10 years. Correct? Did I understand that correctly? Yes or no?
I heard that. I wasn't aware of anything prior to 2011.
Well, I heard testimony is going back as far as 2008 and 9. Ms. Chambers, do you receive a bonus?
No, sir.
Do you, Mr. Jarvis?
No, sir.
2008, you never received a bonus?
No, sir.
2010?
No, sir.
2011?
My salary is fixed, exactly, no bonus.
Thank you. Are you back?
Will the gentleman yield to Chairman Bishop?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Jarvis, you gave a nice spin there, but you didn't answer his question. His question is, who is ultimately responsible? Not what have you done. Who is ultimately responsible?
I am the Director of the Park Service. I am
So you are ultimately responsible for this?
ultimately responsible.
What about Ms. Chambers? What culpability does she have in this chain of reaction?
She is the line supervisor of U.S. Park Police. She is also responsible.
Look, guys, there was a 2003 report that was given. 133 guns were missing. 2 ended up in a pawn shop. A 2008 report that showed problems. A 2009 report that showed problems. All of you were on the job then. Mr. Jarvis, what specifically did you do to implement the findings of the 2009 report?
I was unaware of the 2009 report.
But it came under your watch.
I was not the Director until October of
No, you were the Director after this report was taken. This report was permitted. What did you do about it? Even if it came after you took office, which it did not, what should you have done about it?
I should hold my line supervisors accountable to follow the procedures.
Just the line supervisors? I mean, Ms. Chambers, you're throwing everyone in your department under the bus. How much accountability should you have for that? That was his question that hasn't been answered. How much accountability should you hold?
Full accountability.
Have you taken full accountability and responsibility for it?
Yes, sir, I have.
What's your action then?
We have, the most immediate has been to elevate the position of the firearms manager, sort of custodian.
What about your
So
responsibility?
that I have a more direct line of communication with.
So you're still blaming other people for it?
No, sir. It is my responsibility.
I'm going to yield back to the gentleman from Michigan.
Gentleman yields back. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and both chairmen have started touching on this, but I read in this letter, it said this report further underscores the letter from the Deputy Inspector General Kendall. This report further underscores the decade-long theme of inaction and indifference of U.S. Park Police leadership. Basic tenets of property management and supervisory oversight are missing in their simplest forms. Commanders up to and including the Chief of Police have a lackadaisical attitude towards firearms management. Historical evidence indicates that this indifference is a product of years of inattention to administrative detail. That is a very disturbing letter. And then it becomes even more disturbing when I read that the 2008 report and the 2009 report both had the same language. We found a disconcerting attitude toward firearms accountability with U.S. Park Police. Within U.S. Park Police in particular, we found that firearms custodians were unaware of the number of guns in their inventory or of the origin of these guns, and that guns physically present were not listed on the inventory. That is very disturbing. That this has been going on for, it says, a decade, and that there was this report in 2008 and 2009. Are we going to be back here 5 years from now and the situation is going to be the same? I mean, will each of you assure us that something's going to be done to straighten this out and change these lackadaisical attitudes about this, or are you just going to go back to your offices and laugh about this hearing?
I'll respond to that. Absolutely, I can assure you that we will not be back in here, other than perhaps to report on the final findings of this investigation. But I can assure you that we will throughout the National Park Service, including the U.S. Park Police, ensure accountability throughout the organization.
Ms. Chambers?
I certainly echo the Director's remarks. Action has been taken and will continue to be taken. It's a continual improvement process, and we will get better at it with each day.
Is it accurate, the report I have, that there are 640 officers in your department or in
Approximately,
your
sir.
force?
Yes, sir.
I mean, that's not a gigantic bureaucracy. It looks like to me like it shouldn't be this difficult to straighten this out and change these attitudes and this indifference. So thank you very much. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We'll start a second round here. I recognize myself. Chief Chambers, in response to Chairman Bishop, you said that you were elevating this position or this person. What does that mean?
Not the person, sir, the position. It's been
When you say elevate, what does that mean?
Right now, it is in the hand. The firearms custodian position is handled by a sergeant who also is our range master. That's not appropriate. I need a person full-time who will devote all of his energy to the management of the firearms. So a lieutenant is now being taken from another position. That lieutenant is being pulled out of a chain of command and going right to the deputy chief, who sits next to my office.
So how many weapons, then, does the U.S. Park Police have? What is the current inventory?
Approximately 2,500, sir.
So you have 2,500 weapons. Why that number? Why 2,500?
Well, sir, a patrol officer would have 3 weapons each: a firearm at his side, a pistol, a patrol rifle, and a taser. So the IG found that there were, in their words, 1,400 extra weapons. What are these extra weapons? Sir, I would have characterized it differently, but as I've probed, the extra weapons included things like serialized parts, firearms that had been cannibalized so that we could keep other firearms in working condition without incurring additional cost. Some of these were training weapons. Some, as we had already discussed, were those that were set aside, awaiting disposal once we were able to get a contract again. So you said 2,500 weapons is how many you have? Approximately, yes, sir. You have 640 officers? Yes, sir. You said that a person would have 3 weapons? Patrol officer would have 3, yes, sir. Who has more than 3 weapons? It is likely that a SWAT officer may have an additional weapon depending on his assignment. Okay, so you have 640 sworn officers. They have 3 weapons each. That's close to 1,900. Yes, sir. How do you account for the other 600 weapons? Sir, many are for training purposes. They include things like simunitions guns that you point at a screen, tasers, things that... When can you provide to this committee, when I say this committee, both committees, Oversight and Natural Resources, the actual inventory? And I'm sorry, you're asking for that copy of the inventory? Yes, sir, I'd be glad to. When will I get that? If I could have a week, that would be appreciated. 1 week sounds reasonable. All right, sir. By next Friday, we look forward to seeing that inventory. I asked you if you took any issue with the idea with the findings of the OIG. He found that you had 1,400 extra weapons. Do you take exception to that? I do, sir. Why didn't you say that before when I asked you? Sir, I didn't want to interrupt. Others were speaking. No, I asked you that question. You weren't interrupting. How is it that there's such disparity between... How did you come up with the number 1,400 extra weapons?
Chairman, during our assessment, we physically examined over 1,350 or so weapons on hand. At the same time, the Force Firearms Custodian provided us a list indicating he had 1,450 essentially weapons on hand. There was a disparity in those numbers, and even as I listened to the Chief testify today, if each officer has a weapon and we have 1,920 weapons therefore issued, that would leave only 600 on hand for a total count of 2,500, but we counted twice that many. And granted, they are a collection of...
Let me understand that. You counted how many weapons?
1,350.
No, but when you said twice that many, twice of what? Explain that to me.
If 3 weapons are issued to each officer, meaning a total of 1,920, right, and if 2,500 is the total sum of weapons in possession of the Park Police, we should have only been able to count 600 weapons when we went through the various facilities. but in fact we counted 1,350.
Chief, how do you answer that?
Sir, many of those are patrol rifles that have not yet been issued. The patrol rifle program, it takes 40 hours for an officer to get fully certified, and at this moment, we don't have a range to use, so we use those as we can get it. It will take several more years until every officer is certified to carry a patrol rifle.
Mr. Jarvis, do you concur with everything the Chief's saying?
I do. I want to add one other factor, though, that they are in possession of some 500 weapons that are scheduled for disposal.
Would any of those disposals include the sale of those weapons?
I do not believe so, sir.
Why not? Why not sell the weapon? They're value.
I think our policies are that those weapons go to disposal.
That's a policy we need to revisit. My time's expiring here. Now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Knox, just for the sake of definition, it's my understanding that what triggered your investigation and your recommendations and findings was an anonymous tip or an anonymous complaint. That anonymity, is it for the sake of protecting a whistleblower under the statute, or is it indeed anonymous, as the definition would be of anonymous?
Congressman, in this instance, the complaint was received anonymously. We have no knowledge of it.
Was it in writing or phone call, or?
The complaint was received in writing.
And excuse me, I don't have that with me. That particular complaint, that's been made available to the committee in writing?
No, sir, I don't believe it has.
Could, Mr. Chairman, could we have that complaint in writing as part of the record?
Are you asking me for the complaint? I'll have to consult with the Deputy Inspector General on our policy relating to releasing.
The committee would certainly appreciate that, not just the consultation, but to comply with the ranking member's request.
I understand. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And excuse me, I keep, and to all the witnesses, I keep asking the same question to people because I keep looking for a smoking gun and I can't seem to find one, pardon the pun. The Fraternal Order of Police has concerns with the methodology and the allegations made in the IG report. They believe that law enforcement best practices were not followed, and that the report unjustly places blame on the current agency administration for the failure of previous chiefs of police, and that the report undermines the credibility of this and future Inspector General assessments, and indeed the credibility of the force itself. Chief, your reaction to that assessment? And I will ask the same of you, Mr. Knox, if you don't mind.
The Fraternal Order of Police's communication with you was, of course, on their own volition. The fact that one agrees or disagrees with how the Inspector General's report may have been conducted is not as important to me as the value I find. And I did find it valuable, and the 10 recommendations are a great roadmap for us, and I intend to see that they're fully implemented.
Thank you, Mr. Knox.
Congressman, I received a copy of the Fraternal Order of Police letter just moments before while we were in recess. I've read it. I'm not sure what information they might be referring to. I take exception to their statement about undermining the value of OIG activity. In fact, our recommendations have been received well by the National Park Service, and we're pleased that they intend to implement them.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that that the fact that the reaction from the administration and the department has been to be proactive and say, okay, let's look at these and make corrections and adjustments. But we keep looking for the root cause of all this, and so that's why I'm assuming we're having this hearing, rather than giving it ample time for the recommendations to be implemented, to be corrected, and then to have a hearing on the assessment toward the end of the line, as opposed to making some judgments now that are probably, I think, patently unfair when the process isn't done yet. But given all that, there was a transition going on, Ms. Thorson, from one system to another, dealing with the reliable weapons inventory. Do you believe that that transition to a new system is one of the reasons the Park Police could not provide the Inspector General at that moment of the snapshot with the records upon request?
Without understanding the thorough assessment process that the IG use, they have their own methodologies in which they follow when they do their assessments. It appears that when they were looking for records and talking to the chief, they were unable to bring up records in the FBMS system. So that may have very well played into the fact that they could not produce at the time the electronic accounting records needed for verification. FBMS is the Financial Business and Management System, Financial and Business Management System for the Department.
Thank you. And, not by act of Congress and by, unfortunately, a signature of the administration, we have guns in the parks. And the public can have that access. And I would suspect that maybe our committee's time would be well served to assessing how that's going, what stress is put at Park Police and employees, and what, if any, backlash has been in terms of public acceptance of that. With that, I yield back, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now recognize Chairman Bishop for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Ms. Thorson, you're the person who oversees all the law enforcement programs in the Department. What is your responsibility to ensure the Department firearm policies are known and followed?
The Office of Law Enforcement and Security in the Department is part of the tiered responsibility in the Department for firearms accountability. It starts with the officer, supervisory chain, the chief in this instance, the director of the particular bureau that the law enforcement program resides in.
So is it your responsibility to make sure she knows what she's supposed to be doing?
We do that through compliance evaluations periodically, yes. So
if the chief claims that she didn't know about some of these things, is that your responsibility for making that known? Has it been your office's failure in her not understanding what she was supposed to be doing?
No, I do not believe it's our office's failure.
But that's your responsibility.
Our responsibility is to issue departmental policy, which we did after the 2009 report was issued.
How do you follow up on that?
We follow up with periodic compliance evaluations, and we are in the middle of doing a firearms assessment right now on all 7 law enforcement programs in the Department.
The report, they started looking at this thing in February. You started counting in July. Why was there that disparity of time? Why did you wait so long to try and find out what the answers would be? Ms. Thorson, I'm still coming at you.
Actually, we started our assessment in April, and we are still in the middle of that.
Mr. Knox, you didn't do a baseline accounting, did you, of how many guns ought to be there? What is the number that should be?
Mr. Chairman, we could not do that. The records were not available.
All right, Ms. Thorson, what has your office done to provide an accurate baseline accounting for firearms, not just within her department, but across the department?
With the Park Police, we are part of the team that is actually out doing a physical inventory right now regarding the Park Police.
Are you doing a baseline?
We are doing a physical inventory at this point, and as
is somebody going to come up with how many weapons should be out there?
That's the next phase. As talked about earlier, we will be looking at, the Park Service in particular will be looking at purchasing records, transfer records, and comparing those to their physical inventory.
When's that going to happen? When will that be done?
I don't have an exact date, but I'm hoping in the next month or two, fairly
soon. So are we. The Department's testimony says, go ahead.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Recommendation number 6 is to say reduce the firearms inventory to no more than the minimum necessary to equip law enforcement. That's to be done by October 2013. If you don't have a baseline, you don't know how many you're going to reduce it by. I worry that, do you even know what the recommendations are?
Yes, I do, sir.
Yeah. 2009. Did you do any of these? Yeah, that's the next question.
Yield back.
All right. The Department testimony says the Office of Law Enforcement and Security will work with the Park Service to provide additional oversight. That suggests that OLES has not in the past been conducting adequate oversight of the Department's law enforcement units and their firearm inventory. Did you or OLES conduct any oversight in response to the allegations of the 2009 report? to ensure that recommendations were implemented? Did you do anything for the 2009 report?
We issued a variety of policies in our firearms policy, and then we have since also looked and compared policies at the Bureau of Land Management, the Bureau of Reclamation, and the Fish and Wildlife Service Office of Law Enforcement to ensure that they had policies in place that we in the Department identified from the 2009 report.
So why wasn't he able to find any of that stuff?
Well, those were 3 different bureaus. The Park Police, the process for the Park Service and the Park Police with them, and that follow-up is scheduled in the next couple of months. We have the capacity we have in the Department with 7 law enforcement programs. We are going through them systematically.
All right. Okay. So they are different than the others, and I get that. But in 2009, it was supposed to be, the recommendation was, OLES should revise existing policy to direct that lost or missing cache firearms must be reported and investigated similar to lost or missing assigned firearms. That was the responsibility in 2009. Why didn't you do it? This is now 4 years later. We find out it hasn't been done. Why wasn't it done?
We did issue policy, Chairman, to ensure that weapons lost, missing weapons were reported. Those are required to be reported up into our Interior Operations Center on a serious incident report.
But what good are those policies if no one knows about it and no one is following up on it? You have no follow-up on what you said you did after the two. There is no reason that this IG's report should have come out. There was already a problem in 2003 when all of you were involved. There was a report in 2008 and another one in 2009. It told you to do this. You say you issued policies, but no one knows about them and no one followed up on them. Why not?
The bureaus do know about the policies we issued. We issued them to all 7 law enforcement programs once they are issued from the Department. We also have ongoing conversations with the bureaus, the Bureau law enforcement programs, after we, in fact, while we're developing those policies and when we issue those policies. So they are aware of those policies.
Then why didn't you have the data? Why were these things missing? Why did the IG report find out so many problems that they labeled also as a lackadaisical action and a culture that takes place? Why wasn't this thing solved in 2009 if you actually did your job in 2009? If you actually followed the policies that were requested and you say you did, why do we still have this problem 4 years later? And it was a perfect question by Mr. Duncan. Are we going to have the same thing happen in 5 years because of the attitude, lackadaisical attitude we have in the Department? Ms. Thorson, this is your responsibility. Why has it not been done? Why 4 years later are we still in a mess?
The responsibility and accountability for firearms rests partly with the Department, but also with, as I said earlier, the officer, supervisory chain, the chief, and the director of whatever particular bureau the law enforcement program falls in. And as the director spoke earlier to, they do regular inventories, yearly inventories, and information assurance statements every year to ensure that those accountable property items are tracked. So my expectation is that the bureaus and their programs are executing those requirements through policies we issue and policies issued by the acquisition and property management staff.
All right, I'm way over time, so I'll ask this simple question. If you did everything right, who screwed up?
The Department issued policies for actually the 2008 and the 2009 reports. The Park Police did not institute all of those policies, which we found out, and we are implementing those recommendations as we speak right now from the IG's report.
So Ms. Chambers screwed up.
There are many layers of folks that were not taking appropriate accountability. As we
So you all screwed up?
No, I would not say everybody screwed up, sir.
But somebody had to.
There are members of the force, members of the Park Service, as identified by the IG in the report, that apparently were not able to account for their firearms. So we take the recommendations to heart. We are implementing their
And then if you did the policies, you took the recommendations that go back 4 years ago, and you did all of that, this IG's report should not have happened. Somewhere there was a failure. This IG's report should not have happened at all. Somewhere there is a failure, and someone needs to be responsible for that failure. I'm sorry, I do have one last question. You said you elevated this new position. to take care of this problem?
Sir, I've assigned it to a rank, one rank higher.
So someone got promoted to do this?
No, sir. Our current lieutenant has now been moved into this new position.
Also, someone on staff has been promoted into this new position?
Not promoted, sir. Moved laterally from his other assignment as a shift commander.
Was that person responsible for this? Never mind. I think you understand where I'm coming. Somebody got a new assignment because of this, but that doesn't solve the problem. I'm sorry for going over.
One of the challenges is everybody, we take responsibility, but nobody's held accountable. Nobody's held accountable. That's the problem. Is anybody fired? Has anybody been fired? No. And we have this persistent problem. We're dealing with weapons. This is not an inexcusable, oh, sorry, I won't let that happen again. If President Obama wants gun control, he should start with the United States Park Police. Now, give a very generous 5 minutes for the gentlewoman from Washington, D.C., Ms. Norton.
Well, the committee is, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, is right to be concerned about the IG report and what looks like difficulties of setting up a true system to keep track of guns. Anybody who has control of guns has a special responsibility. I must say I find it also interesting that this committee is as interested as it is in the question, since it has tried in the past to wipe out all the gun laws in the District of Columbia, which would have given the Park Police a whole lot more work than it has now. So I'm interested less in beating somebody up and finding out how to get this done, given the personnel issues that face every agency, including the Park Police. Now, did I understand you to say that you are not filling vacancies, Ms. Chambers?
Not sworn vacancies, and civilian ones only on a as-need basis and approved up to chain of command.
So no matter how low you have a lieutenant, was he in a line position that had to do with patrol of the Park Police throughout the region?
Yes, ma'am, he was a shift commander.
So somebody's going to have to do that job, which has to do with law and order. So I'm concerned that at a time when even officers of the Park Police, when they leave the Park Police and create a vacancy cannot be replaced, that we're talking about why people aren't doing what clearly they should have been doing in this climate. All I can say, Chief Chambers, is in trying to get a hold of this inventory, important responsibility of the Park Service and of the Park Police, I certainly hope that because you have heard so much at this hearing from Congress, and that can always be intimidating, you will bear in mind that the public wants our monuments to be safe. Our public wants the 20 million visitors who come to this city from around the world to be safe, especially since most of them go to the monuments and to the mall. So I can only hope that your first priority, whatever the concern, and it is a legitimate concern about these guns, does not deflect you from the law and order mandate of the Park Police. Mr. Knox, is there any evidence that there's ever been a system to keep control of guns? I mean, aren't we starting from the ground up?
Congresswoman, the current state of accountability for weapons at the Park Police is in disarray.
I understand that. I'm saying, but it sounds to me as though no one ever invented one.
Well, there is no, as we say in our report, we don't have a baseline from which to start. There's no point in time where we have any confidence in any inventory.
So bear that in mind, that essentially there's no record that the Park Police has ever, in any administration at any time, done anything but keep the guns from getting out of its control, and apparently it has done that. But it's never had the kind of professional system that we'd expect a law enforcement office to have. Of course, the Park Police has been among the most unappreciated and least well-staffed police forces, federal police forces. And, it shows. So I understand this as an important issue. I represent this city. If the Park Police doesn't keep control of guns, then, of course, in no small measure, this city may be the first to feel the effects of it. But we're asking the Park Police to invent a system that was never in place at a time when they will not be able to replace peace officers, no matter how low the number gets, when and if they leave. So I want to make it clear that there are mandates and there are mandates. And I certainly hope nothing in this hearing makes you believe that there is any mandate more important than making sure that our monuments, our visitors, and the people, our federal employees, the people who come to this city in huge numbers every day are safe. Mr. Knox, this may not be done as fast as it should be, but I assume you also would believe that their first priority should be the protective mandate of any police force.
Congresswoman, of course we do. I do as well personally. But I would like to say that weapons accountability is a very fundamental task of a law enforcement agency and not a difficult one to achieve. It just takes leadership.
Agreed, and I'm the first to agree to that. As I say, my district would be the first to feel the effects. But you're talking to people who cannot fill any position at any time, and whose budget is going to go lower and lower each year unless we do something about it. I think everybody ought to put all the cards on the table, and that's the big elephant in this hearing room today. And I yield back the balance of my time, and I thank the Chairman.
And I thank the gentlewoman. I would remind the gentlewoman, but the U.S. Park Service spends some $50 million a year acquiring new properties, acquiring new things. We can't even take care of what we have now. So if you share my commitment that we need the proper personnel, they need to be trained, they need to be supervised properly, perhaps the gentlewoman would join me in making sure that rather than acquiring new things and spending the tune of $50 million a year doing so within just this one department, maybe we should take care of what we have here today. Now I'll yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts. Recognize him for the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bentivolio, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me be perfectly clear. There's no doubt in my mind that I don't think our officers on the job are not doing that job in protecting life and property of the United States government as well as our visitors. But Ms. Chambers, Chief Chambers, I'm still a little concerned. You said something earlier that you did not know what a report of survey was, like what, last year, or you just learned of it? Is that right?
After the interview with the Inspector General's investigator, I then inquired of my staff, what is this term, what does it mean? And they provided me with all the background.
Okay. And how long have you been in this position?
Sir, I was reinstated in January of 2011.
Reinstated?
Yes, sir.
That means you held this position before?
Yes, sir.
What years was that?
2002 and 2003, sir.
So you held this position before and you didn't find out what a report of survey was?
I'd never heard the term, sir.
Do you have any military experience?
No, sir, I don't.
Okay. I could pretty much ask most privates and corporals and surely an E5 sergeant what a report of survey is, and they'll be able to tell you. And I'm a little bit surprised and disturbed that somebody at your rank doesn't understand that. Now, let me ask you another question real quickly. If I went and just stopped in one of your field offices where there were some rifles or pistols, and I asked you and read the serial number, would you be able to tell me where it was acquired, when it was acquired, who had it, or a chain, if you will, or, somebody signed for it, a hand receipt for it, anything like that?
Not knowing the capabilities of the financial business management system that we just got access to, I don't know that answer today, but I'd be glad to find out for you.
Okay, so let's say I'm an officer. Do I come in and say, hey, I'd like to check out a rifle? I'm, qualified, but sure, I was the master gunner for my unit. I'm SWAT trained, former military policeman. I know how this works. How do I get that weapon?
Actually, we've got such a request right now. An officer would request to have one assigned to him so that he doesn't have to go to an arms room. It would be assigned to him each and every day to take out on patrol.
Okay, what do you mean you don't have an arms room? If he signs it out every day, you got to have a secure.
There would be a secure area for him, yes, sir.
Okay, so these are locked up overnight when he's not on duty?
Correct, sir.
Okay, and then when he shows up in the morning, he's going on duty. Does he sign for that weapon?
He better. I don't know the answer.
He better?
There are sign-out procedures.
Okay, well, there should be an armorer or somebody that hands that weapon over to him, and he signs for it. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
All right. Now, if you're not doing that, I'm going to highly recommend U.S. Army veterans. Do you hire any veterans?
We do, sir.
Well, they know this stuff backwards and forwards. They know the procedure. Maybe you should consult somebody who has experience in this area other than somebody who, well, apparently doesn't know. Because there should be a chain of title or a chain that I can look at right now and see a serial number and ask you where that weapon is, or find out immediately where that weapon is and who had it at all times, at any moment. And in the Army, if you didn't do that in my unit, you'd be relieved on the spot. There would be a reported survey on the spot. 5 or 6 officers would have their heads rolling if they didn't get it fixed within hours.
And that's certainly the ultimate goal.
But nobody's head's rolling. Nobody understands. And I keep hearing 5 to 10 years. And apparently you didn't know what a reported survey was even back in 2002 when you held this position.
That's correct.
Okay. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize myself as we wrap this up. I do have a few more questions. Chief, how is it that somebody could walk up to the Lincoln Memorial, throw green paint on it, and walk away without anybody noticing? How does that happen?
Sir, if a criminal is intent on committing a crime in the presence or outside the presence of a police officer's view, he or she can do it. Fortunately, we have got technology that has helped us gather the evidence needed in this case.
Why wasn't that person apprehended on the spot? I mean, is there not a person there patrolling at the time?
There is, sir, and he had just left that side of the statue and was actually on the back side at the moment that it occurred. I'm confident that it happened very quickly based on other witness statements.
I find it totally and wholly unacceptable that we don't have the adequate control on something so precious and so visible, so close to the White House as the Lincoln Memorial. It's just, we'll have to get into that further. How much ammunition do you have?
Sir, we have approximately 500,000 rounds of ammunition, and we'll be using about 200,000 of that here in the next few months for requalification that happens twice a year.
So if you use 200,000 rounds for 640 people, I'll have to work back and do the math. That seems like an awful lot, actually, as I kind of calculate right off the top of my head here. What I would like, and Mr. Jarvis, I would like this from you and Ms. Thorson as well, all 7 of the agencies, I hope you find it reasonable to ask for the current inventory. We've done this with other departments and agencies. We did it with Social Security Administration. We've done it with others. It's not a new ask. To provide us a listing of how the current inventory of all the weapons broken out by each of the 7 agencies, or departments, whatever you want to call them, that would also include the inventory of ammunition. And if you could also show us the historical purchases of both weapons and ammunition for the last 5 years, that would be very helpful. And the final thing that I would ask is a projection on what you anticipate purchasing over the next 24 months. I know that crosses a couple different fiscal years and whatnot, but certainly have some sort of projection. Mr. Jarvis, is that a reasonable ask?
I think the ask for the current inventory is very reasonable. I think we can supply that. At least I'm speaking for the Park Service. I can't speak for the other agencies. And also inventory of weapons and ammunition. Projection. The one caveat I would say, going back and looking over the past 5 years of procurement, that's a big lift. As was indicated here a little bit behind the scenes, we have transitioned to a new
what's a reasonable time that you would get that to the two committees?
I will have to get back to you on how much time that will take. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver on that, so I want to be able to tell you how long it would take.
Could we say September 7th? Is that a reasonable time?
I think
over a month away.
That we could get back to you with how long it will take.
Yeah. No.
I cannot promise you that I can have 5 years of procurement data to you by September 7th. That is unreasonable.
Let's say this: by the end of August, that you would get us the current inventories, which you supposedly have right on your disposal at this time, and we'll give you an additional 30 days for the projection of procurement. Is that fair? The end of September for the procurement projections.
I would guess that our projections for procurement is probably the next 12 months, because we don't fiscal year.
The next 12 months is the start. That gives you almost 60 days to do the. I think that's reasonable. Ms. Thorson, can we do that with all the agencies or all the departments under those time parameters?
Well, I also don't want to overpromise and underdeliver.
I'm asking you to make a commitment. You're the one in charge. If you want to ask,
I will work with the other directors in the bureaus to ensure that they get the direction and that we move forward. Absolutely.
And that you'll hit those dates.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now yield to or recognize the gentleman from Utah, Chairman Bishop.
I was just making sure when he said the gentleman from Utah, he actually meant me. Mr. Knox, you didn't go through an assessment of procurement or storage or anything else of ammunition, did you, in the report?
Mr. Chairman, no, we did not.
Were there anecdotal evidences or issues that you saw as you were going through the report?
Anecdotally, we observed as we moved through the various facilities conditions which could be enhanced for security.
Okay.
All of which I should mention, sir, were known by the Park Police and something they're dealing with.
Ms. Thorson, you have a policy for missing weapons?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Knox, did Chief Chambers know that policy for missing weapons?
Mr. Chairman, I cannot tell you whether she knew or did not know.
Isn't the claim is that you were not aware of that policy, though? Is that right, Ms. Chambers?
I believe the report would make one believe that I did not know, but that's not accurate, sir.
You did know?
Of course, sir.
That means you should have done something about it then.
Sir, we have no evidence of missing weapons.
Right. There's a couple of last requests I'm going to have from everybody here. Mr. Knox, this is something for which you are not responsible, but we are going to call for it one more time. Ms. Kendall's title is Acting IG, right?
Mr. Chairman, she uses the title Deputy IG, which is the position she held. She did act for a while, but the Vacancy Act.
Is there an IG, a permanent IG?
No, sir. We at the Interior Department do not have a permanent.
It's been about 4 years since we had one, right? I'm going to make this call one more time, as our committee has in previous occasions. There needs to be a permanent IG appointed, and it would give some more credibility to the reports that are coming out of your office. We need to have a permanent IG. I appreciate that. Mr. Jarvis, I do have some empathy for the position you have, especially when the Park Police has an autonomous streak to it, but the responsibility is still to come back with these reports. I noticed that many of the recommendations were asking to be done by October 1st, to be completed by October 1st. I would like you to supply our committee with the evidence of what you have done by October 1st to implement all these recommendations. And I appreciate that. Ms. Thorson, it would be the same thing if we can get by October 1st the implementation report from what you have been doing. Ms. Chambers, are you a political appointee in this position or are you merit?
Merit, sir.
So you will stay there until you decide to retire.
Yes, sir.
We need a better job. This is not acceptable from those who are under you, and that's all there is. I mean, this report should never come out because in 2003, your entity lost 133 guns. They found them in pawn shops in Georgia, a couple of them. This will not happen again. This should not happen again. It is your responsibility. Make sure it does not happen again. And, Mr. Jarvis, we will hold you accountable for that as well.
You've got my commitment, sir.
Gentleman yields back. Will recognize the ranking member, Mr. Tierney from Massachusetts.
Thank you. Mr. Jarvis, in this particular instance, following this report, have there been any identification of lost weapons?
No, sir, there have not.
No indication of people finding them in pawn shops or anything else?
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Knox, you did a weapons accountability overview on your report and recommend that they have a better system of weapons accountability, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you base that on best practices in law enforcement field?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's reflected in your recommendations?
It is, in fact.
Okay. Mr. Jarvis, you've looked at those 8 recommendations, and you think they're reasonable?
Yes, and there are 10, actually.
10.
Look at all 10. Yes, sir.
And, Ms. Chambers, you agree?
I do, sir.
All right. And you are in the process of trying to accommodate all of those 10 recommendations, correct?
Some have already been completed. Many of the others are well on their way, sir.
And, Mr. Knox, you have committed to having a constant overview of this progress?
Yes, sir. As I stated in my opening remarks, we feel we must stay engaged and continue some reviews.
Okay. And how will you do that?
We will schedule reviews and inspections after we receive results from the National Park Service on the implementation of our 10 recommendations.
And if you feel that they're falling unreasonably behind the schedule for timeliness that you said, you'll notify the committees that are here today?
Yes, sir, we will.
Okay. And neither Mr. Jarvis nor Ms. Chambers have any difficulty with that at all? You're set on that process? Do you feel that each of you has the personnel that's competent to carry out these recommendations?
Yes, and we've drawn from the Department of Interior as well to assist us in that work.
And Ms. Thorson, you're satisfied with that as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you all for your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you. We appreciate your attentiveness to this matter. We look forward to hitting those dates and those commitments that we made, and the committee now stands adjourned.
I just saw somebody took good notes. Did you write down everything you wanted? Yes. And